The scent of my own pack's fear is a bitter perfume. I stand in the heart of the clearing where I was once broken, the winter wind whipping my hair, now the color of fresh snow. Before me, Peter, the Alpha, kneels, not in supplication, but because my power has forced him to his knees. His amber eyes, once so cold, are wide with a shock, so profound it feels like a victory all its own. The gash on his cheek from my claws weeps crimson onto the frosted earth. All around us, the pack is silent, a ring of stunned faces under the full moon. James steps forward, his face a mask of fury. "You don't belong here, exile," he snarls, but his voice lacks its old conviction. He smells of panic. I don't even look at him. My gaze is locked with Peter's. I let my power swell, a palpable wave that makes the strongest warriors flinch. I lean down, just a little, so only he can hear my whisper, which carries on the wind to every wolf present. "You cast out a wounded Omega," I say, my voice steady, a blade of ice. "What do you do when she comes back as an alpha?" But I'm getting ahead of myself. It didn't start with blood. It started with the first thing I knew was the cold. It seeped through the thin fabric of my dress, a biting, merciless cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air and everything to do with the stone beneath me. I pushed myself up, my palms scraping on rough-hewn rock. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache centered on the back of my skull. Disorientation swam through me, thick and cloying. Where was I? The last clear memory was of Peter's face, twisted in an anger I didn't understand, and James's smug, satisfied, blinking against the gloom. I took in my surroundings. I was in a shallow cave, little more than a depression in the rocky hillside that bordered the northern edge of our territory, the unclaimed lands. The scent of damp moss, old stone, and distant pine was overwhelming, but underneath it all was the fading, familiar smell of pack, Peter, James, and others. They had brought me here. They had left me here. A fresh wave of cold, deeper than the chill in the air, shot through my veins. This was the moon-cursed ridge, a place for exiles, for the broken, for those cast out of the pack. No one came back from the ridge. My name is Emily, and as the reality crashed down, I remembered I was an Omega, the lowest, the silenced. The pack's gentle heart, they called it, but in moments like this, it felt like being the pack's permanent victim. A sharp, cramping pain clenched low in my abdomen, and I gasped, folding over myself. It passed after a few seconds, leaving a phantom ache. The baby. My hand flew to my stomach, still flat, but where the new, fragile life pulsed within. Peter's baby. Our baby. The secret I'd been holding for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to tell him, to see his stern alpha expression soften into... He'd never given me the chance. The sound of approaching footsteps on loose scree had me scrambling back against the cave wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. A silhouette blocked the weak light filtering into the cave entrance. Pete. He stood there, a towering figure framed by the gray sky, his broad shoulders tense. He didn't enter. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable in the shadows, but his scent was a storm of conflict. Sharp anger, bitter resolve, and something else, something sour and shameful he tried to smother. "Peter," I breathed, the word a plea and a question. "You shouldn't have been in the council chamber, Emily." His voice was flat, the voice he used for delivering judgments, not the rough, warm whisper he used to reserve for my ear alone. "You heard things that were not for an Omega's ears. I brought you the autumn harvest tally," I said, my own voice trembling. "You asked for it. The door was open. I heard James talking about an alliance with the Riverstone Pack, an alliance sealed by a mating." The pain in my gut returned, sharper. "He said your mate. He said my name." Peter's jaw tightened. "James speaks out of turn. His ambitions outpace his wisdom." "But is it true?" The words tore from me. Are you casting me aside for an alliance? He took one step into the cave, and the dominance that rolled off him was a physical pressure, meant to soothe, to subdue. It once felt like a warm blanket. Now it felt like a chain. It's not about casting aside. It's about the survival of the pack. The Riverstone Alphas have strength we need. Their daughter, Maria, a union would secure our borders, bring new hunters. Maria, I repeated, the name ash in my mouth. I knew of her. A fierce, beautiful beta from a powerful family. You will always have my protection, Emily, Peter continued, as if offering a great kindness. But as my true mate, an Omega cannot be an Alpha's consort. Not when the pack is weak. It's not done. The finality in his voice shattered something inside me. The pain in my abdomen spiked again, a vicious twist. I hugged my stomach. Peter, there's something you need to know. The decision is made, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for appeal. You cannot return to the pack house. James believes your presence is a bad omen, that you overheard too much. He has convinced James has wanted me gone since the day you claimed me. I cried, finding a spark of the fire he was trying to extinguish. And his reasons are now pack reasons, Peter said, his eyes finally meeting mine. In them I saw no love, only the heavy burden of duty. You will remain here. Joseph will bring you supplies once a week. You will be safe. Safe in the cursed ridge, as an outcast. I laughed, a broken, hollow sound. What about the baby, Peter? For a fraction of a second, his dominance faltered. His eyes dropped to my hands, clenched over my stomach. Confusion, then a dawning, horrific understanding flickered across his face. Then it was shut away, replaced by something harder, colder. It changes nothing. The 4 words were an execution. The child of an exiled Omega has no place in my pack, he said, each word a deliberate blow. It is better this way, for everyone. He turned to leave. Peter! The scream was raw, torn from the very core of me. He paused but didn't look back. You are its father, you are my mate. The moon herself blessed our bond. He glanced over his shoulder, his profile stark and cruel against the light. The moon blessed a union, Emily. She did not promise it would last. The pack is my first mate. It always will be. And then he was gone. His footsteps receded, leaving only the sound of the wind and the frantic, terrified beat of my own heart. The cramping returned, more intense. A hot, terrifying wetness seeped through my dress. I looked down, my vision blurring with tears. A single, dark red drop stained the gray stone between my feet. The world narrowed to that spot. The cold, the cave, the abandonment, all of it was secondary to that tiny, spreading bloom of crimson. My baby, our baby, the last fragile piece of him I had left. A sound escaped me, not a sob, but a low, wounded animal whine that echoed in the shallow cave. Despair threatened to pull me under, a black, icy tide. But as I stared at that drop of blood, something in the core of my being, something deeper than my Omega submission, deeper than my love for Peter, stirred. It was a tiny, guttering spark. It was fury. The cliff was not my end. It was my beginning. Peter had made his choice. He had chosen his pack, his power, his duty, over me and our child. He had believed the old stories that an Omega was weak, was nothing without her Alpha. As another cramp twisted through me, I made a promise to the stone, to the wind, to the fading scent of my mate-turned-executioner. I pressed my hand hard against my stomach, whispering through clenched teeth, "You will not take this from me, and he will see me. I swear it." The spark caught, burning through the despair, fueled by betrayal and a mother's terror. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But as the first true snowflake of the season drifted into the mouth of the cave, landing silently beside the drop of my blood, I knew. This was not my grave. It was my crucible. The pain was a living thing, a red wolf gnawing at my belly. I curled tighter into the shallow cave's dirt, my fingers clawing the cold earth as another cramp seized me. Not the pup. Please, not the pup. The memory of Peter's retreating back, straight and unyielding, was a sharper agony than the physical torment. He had left me here to die. He had left us. I don't know how long I lay there, suspended between anguish and a terrifying, hollow numbness. The weak sun climbed, then began to fall, painting the ridge in long, despairing shadows. The cramps subsided, not with a final, tragic release, but with a slow, grudging retreat, leaving behind a deep, throbbing ache and a fragile, tenuous hope. I was still bleeding, but it was slower now. The spark within me, our spark, still flickered. It was that flicker that finally forced me to move. I couldn't stay in this grave of a cave. The cold was seeping into my bones, and the memory of Peter's scent on the wind, a final, cruel taunt, was fading. I had to find water, shelter that was more than a scrape in the rock. Pushing myself up on trembling arms was a monumental task. Every muscle screamed, and the world tilted. I was weak, an Omega's natural state amplified by betrayal and blood loss. The hierarchy of the pack was a law written in flesh. Alphas were strong, betas were capable, omegas were dependent. I had been the most dependent of all, relying on... Now, that structure had cast me out, and its absence was a yawning chasm beneath my feet. I stumbled out of the cave, the vast, jagged expanse of the moon-cursed ridge swallowing me whole. It was a place of stark, unforgiving beauty, all sharp granite and whispering, stunted pines. No pack markers scent-posted the trees. This was truly no man's land, a place for the forgotten. The wind carried no familiar smells, only the clean, sterile scent of stone and the distant... I followed that promise, my progress agonizingly slow. My Omega instincts, usually tuned to the moods of others, were now turned inward, a frantic pulse checking and rechecking the tiny life I sheltered. Hold on, I begged. I found the stream, a silver ribbon cutting through a narrow gully. The water was ice gold and tasted of minerals. I drank until my stomach hurt, then washed the blood from my legs, the water turning pink before swirling clear. The sight of it, my life and maybe my child's, washing away into the unknown rocks, fanned the first true ember of anger in my chest. It was a small, hot coal beside the vast glacier of my grief. Survival became a mechanical process. Find water, find food, find shelter. My wolf, a subdued and gentle presence I had rarely been encouraged to let free, began to stir with a new, desperate purpose. It was she who led me to a cluster of thorny bushes bearing hard, tart berries. My human mind recoiled, but my wolf insisted. I ate them, wincing at the sourness, feeling the sugar hit my bloodstream like a minor blessing. Shelter was a larger cave, deeper set into the ridge face, hidden behind a curtain of thick, creeping ivy. It was dry and, compared to the first, defensible. This was where I decided to make my stand. Not a stand against another pack, but a stand against the end. Days blurred. The bleeding stopped completely. The cramps became a memory. The pup, against all odds, held fast. My body, though still painfully thin and weak, began to adjust to the brutal simplicity of its new existence. Endure. But my mind, I replayed the exile over and over. Peter's words, James's smug, triumphant eyes, the averted gazes of the pack, the proposed alliance with Riverstone, Maria, each memory was a lash. The pain of the betrayal began to metamorphose, hardening from a shattered glass fragility into something denser, sharper. It was no longer just one evening, as I huddled near a small, smokeless fire of dry moss and twigs, the first true wave of transformation hit. It wasn't physical. It was a seismic shift inside my soul. The meek acceptance, the Omega's desire to please and soothe, cracked. A low growl rumbled in my throat, unfamiliar and raw. My hands, cradling my still flat stomach, clenched into fists. "No," I whispered to the darkness. The word was feeble. I said it again, louder. "No." It wasn't a plea. It was a The vision of Peter kneeling in the clearing, under the full moon, flashed before me, not as a hopeful dream, but as a destination. A promise I made to myself and to my child. I would not just survive. I would not crawl back begging for scraps. I would come back as something they could not ignore, as something that could make an alpha kneel. "I will be your equal," I vowed into the fire, the words tasting of smoke and iron. "I will be more." The resolve was one thing, the reality was another. I was an Omega, pregnant and alone. Strength, in the world I came from, was a product of rank, of lineage, of the raw power of one's wolf. I had none of that. My shifts had always been gentle. My wolf formed small and sleek, built for comfort, not combat. A week after my vow, I attempted to shift. It was a desperate idea, born of the need to hunt something more substantial than berries. The process was always effortless in the pack, surrounded by the energy of the others. Here, it was a struggle. My bones ached, my skin prickled, but the shift stalled halfway, leaving me gasping and human on the cave floor, waves of nausea rolling through me. The pup protested violently, a flutter of panic in my womb. I sobbed in frustration, the sound echoing in the lonely cave. I was a failure by every standard I had ever known. But the ridge did not care about pack standards. It had its own laws, the law of hunger, the law of cold, the law of tooth and claw. I was foraging near the stream when I heard the snuffling grunt. A wild boar, a massive, tusked creature with small, angry eyes, emerged from the undergrowth. It hadn't scented me. The wind was wrong, but I was directly in its path to the water. Fear, pure and paralyzing, froze me in place. An Omega's response. "Submit, The boar saw me. It lowered its head, a deep warning rumble in its chest. Run, my every instinct screamed. But running would trigger its chase, and I couldn't run fast enough. In that heart-stopping moment, a different instinct overrode the Omega's fear. A deeper, older one. The instinct of a mother. A fierce, blinding need to protect the life inside me erupted, a silent roar that filled my skull. It didn't feel meek. It didn't feel submissive. I didn't run. I dropped into a crouch, a growl tearing from my human throat that sounded nothing like me. I bared my teeth, my eyes locked on the beast. I was a cornered animal, yes, but not a prey animal. Not anymore. The boar hesitated, confused by the lack of flight. It took a threatening step forward, scraping a tusk against a rock. I didn't blink. I reached down, my fingers closing around a heavy, jagged stone. I hefted it, the weight solid and sure in my hand. "Try it," I hissed, the words guttural. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The protection burning in my chest was a tangible force, a shield of sheer defiance. After what felt like an eternity, the boar let out another grunt, turned, and lumbered away, dismissing me as more trouble than I was worth. I sank to my knees, the stone falling from my trembling hand. I wasn't trembling from fear, but from the aftershock of that new, terrifying power. It hadn't come from my rank. It hadn't come from a mate's strength. It had come from within, from the core of what I was, and what I carried. That night, I tried to shift again, not with the desperate need of an Omega, but with the focused intent of a protector. I thought of the boar. I thought of Peter's cold eyes. I thought of my child. The shift wasn't easy, but it was different. It was purposeful. My bones realigned. My skin gave way to fur. And when I stood on 4 paws, I was still small, still an Omega wolf, but my eyes saw differently. The world was not a hierarchy to navigate, but a territory to assess. A challenge to meet. I caught a rabbit that night. It was messy and inefficient, but I did it. I fed myself. I fed my pup. The days began to form a new pattern, a grueling, brutal curriculum taught by the ridge itself. I learned to listen to the land, to read the signs of weather and predator. My senses, always sharp but previously used to gauge the mood of the pack, were honed for survival. I learned to move silently, to hide perfectly, to strike with precise, necessary violence. The gentle Omega wolf was being stripped away, layer by layer, and something else was being forged in the fire of solitude and necessity. One afternoon, a familiar scent broke the sterile mineral-land pine aroma of the ridge. Joseph. He was downwind, approaching my cave cautiously. The promised supplies. A flicker of the old Emily, the one who longed for pack, for connection, stirred. Then I remembered he was the one Peter sent. The messenger of my exile. I didn't greet him. I melted into the shadows behind a large boulder, watching as he left a small bundle, dried meat, a blanket, a water skin near the cave entrance. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the bleak landscape. He opened his mouth as if to call out, then thought better of it, turning to a cold, calculating anger settled over me. This was not aid. This was a salve for Peter's conscience, a way for him to tell himself he wasn't a monster. These pitiful supplies were my worth to him now. Before Joseph could disappear into the trees, I acted, not with my human voice, but with my new, silent skill. I picked up a stone and threw it with all the strength my lean arm could muster. It didn't hit him, but it struck the tree trunk right beside his head with a sharp crack. He jumped, spinning around, his beta wolf flashing in his eyes. "Who's there?" "Emily." I remained hidden, a ghost in the rocks. Let him wonder. Let him feel a fraction of the unease I lived with every second. He stared into the seemingly empty ridge, his confidence fraying. After a long minute, he shifted into his wolf form, a sturdy brown beta, and fled. His I retrieved the bundle. The meat was tough, the blanket thin. I used them. I was not a fool, but I took no comfort in them. They were trophies of my survival, not gifts from my mate. As the moon waxed full again, marking a month in my exile, the final piece of the change announced itself. I was washing in the stream, the cold water biting my skin, when I saw the reflection. My face was harder, all softness carved away by hunger and resolve. But it was my hair that stopped me. At the temples, running back in stark, elegant streaks, my dark brown hair was turning pure, luminous white. I touched it, stunned. It wasn't the gray of age or stress. It was the white of moonlight on snow, the white of the powerful, terrifying figure from my vision, from my future. A physical manifestation of the power awakening inside me. A power born not of bloodline, but of sacrifice, betrayal, and a mother's. I looked at my reflection, at the white streaks like battle standards in my hair, and I smiled. It was a smile Peter would not recognize. It held no submission, no plea. It was the smile of a wolf who has tasted her own strength and found it good. The pup moved then, a strong, deliberate kick against my womb, a tiny, powerful echo of my own heartbeat. "Soon," I whispered to my child, to the ridge, to the distant pack that thought me gone forever. "We'll go home soon." But it wasn't the home I left. And I was not the Omega they cast out. I was something new, something the rules of their world had not accounted for. And as the next full moon began its inevitable climb, I knew with a cold, certain thrill that my curriculum on the ridge was nearly complete. The final lesson, the one they would all learn, was about to begin. The cliffhanger, the white in my hair was spreading. And with it, a new, terrifying ability awoke. I could feel the emotional signatures of others like a scent on the wind, a dizzying, overwhelming flood of information. The first wave I felt was a potent mix of ambition and smug satisfaction, carried from miles away. It was unmistakably the echo of James's ambition was a sour taste in my mind, a smug, oily smear that lingered long after the empathic pulse had faded. He was moving, scheming, and he was pleased. The knowledge didn't frighten me. It fueled the cold fire that had been burning in my chest since the boar's blood stained the gully. My new awareness was a wild, untamed thing. It didn't come on command. Instead, emotions from the ridge would slam into me, a spike of rodent terror from the underbrush, the dull, placid contentment of a grazing deer, the sharp, focused hunger of a prowling fox. It was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of instinct. I had to learn to filter it, to build mental walls, or the stronger the emotion, and the stronger my connection to the creature feeling it, the clearer the signal. James's had been piercingly clear. The bond of the pack, even a broken one, was a powerful conduit. My priority was the life inside me. The child was a constant, quiet hum in my blood, a second heartbeat of pure potential. My body was changing, strengthening. The nausea had passed, replaced by a voracious hunger and a relentless energy. My muscles, honed by survival, were lean and hard under my skin. The white streaks in my hair, which I'd first seen reflected in the stream, had multiplied. I looked like the vision of myself that had appeared in the cave. I was becoming her. The deeper cave behind the ivy curtain was my sanctuary. I'd lined the floor with dry grass and moss, and the remains of my hunts, rabbit bones, pheasant feathers, were neatly stacked in a corner. Joseph's rejected supplies, the blanket and dried meat, I'd left just inside the main ridge path as a monument to my refusal. Let the crows pick at it. Let Peter know his charity was rotting in the one evening, as dusk bled into night, a new kind of signal pierced my mental defenses. It wasn't animal. It was a wave of profound, aching sorrow, so deep it felt like a physical wound. It came from the west, from the direction of the pack territory. And woven through the sorrow was a thread I would know anywhere. Peter. My breath caught. I hadn't felt him since the bond was severed. This was different, not the mate bond, but this new, raw empathy picking up on a broadcast of pure feeling. He was grieving. The part of me that was still the Omega, the girl who loved him, twisted in sympathetic pain. But the larger part, the mother, the survivor, hardened like stone. Was it for me? For our child? Or was it the self-pity of a man who had made his choice and found the cost bitter? I couldn't tell. The emotion faded, leaving me cold and unsettled. I wouldn't be swayed by his regret. Regret changed nothing. Days bled into weeks. My belly began to round, a gentle, firm curve beneath my tunic. It made hunting more cumbersome, but also more urgent. The empathic flashes became more manageable. I learned to extend my focus, to reach out deliberately instead of just receiving. I could find the rabbit hiding in its burrow by its quick. I could sense the approach of the large mountain cat that sometimes prowled the higher ridges by its silent, predatory intent. The ridge was no longer a chaotic nightmare. It was a map written in feeling. The full moon was approaching again. I could feel its pull in my bones, a magnetic thrum that made my skin itch and my new power sing. The night it rose, huge and silver, I stood on an outcrop above my cave, bathed in its light. The urge to shift was overpowering, a joyous, furious release. I let it come. The transformation was no longer a struggle. It was an expansion. My wolf form was larger now, my coat thick and silver, the white streaks from my hair manifesting as a brilliant, snowy ruff around my neck and chest. I was powerful. I threw my head back and howled, a long, clear note that shattered the ridge's silence. It wasn't the plaintive cry of an omega. It was a declaration, an announcement of territory, of survival. I spent the night running, a silvery ghost through the pines, my senses expanded to a breathtaking degree. I could smell the damp earth 3 feet down, hear the beat of a moth's wings. and I could feel the borders of my exile like a faint, buzzing wall. The ward marks of Peter's pack, the warning for all to stay away from the cursed one. At dawn, weary and exhilarated, I shifted back by the stream. As I washed the night from my skin, another empathic surge hit me. Not an emotion this time. It was a pull. A faint, psychic tug from deep within the ridge to the north, where the rocks grew jagged and the trees gnarled and ancient. It felt old and curious. It wasn't hostile. It was observing. I dressed quickly, my senses on high alert. The ridge, it seemed, had secrets older than my exile. I investigated over the next few days, moving with cautious stealth toward the source of the pull. It led me to a place where the wind whistled through stone teeth, and the ground was littered with strange, flat rocks that seemed almost arranged. The pull was strongest here, a silent, waiting presence. I placed my hand on the largest stone, cold and moss-covered. An image, sharp as a knife, sliced into my mind. Not an image, a memory, not mine. A woman with hair as white as mine standing on this very spot. She was not submissive. She stood straight, a queen of desolation, surrounded by other wolves, not in submission but in a circle of equals. They were not of a single pack. They were outcasts, rogues, loners, and she was their center, their anchor. The whisper of a name came with the vision, Selene. The connection broke. I stumbled back, gasping. The presence was gone, but the knowledge remained, etched into me. The moon-cursed ridge wasn't just a dumping ground. It had a history, a purpose. And I was not the first to be cast out here and change. The revelation changed everything. My goal had been singular: survive, get strong, return, make Peter kneel. Now a new, nebulous possibility hovered at the edge of my mind. What if I wasn't meant to return just to conquer, but to become something else? My thoughts were interrupted by the familiar, hated signature of a pack wolf approaching the border. Joseph. But this time, he wasn't alone. A second signature rode alongside his nervous energy, one that was colder, sharper, and my hackles rose. I melted into the tree line, climbing to a vantage point where I could see the border clearing. Joseph stood, holding a larger pack of supplies, shifting his weight from foot to foot. James was beside him, arms crossed, glaring into the ridge with open contempt. "Come on, creature," James muttered, not even raising his voice. He knew I could hear. "Come get your scraps, we haven't got all day." Joseph flinched. "James, the Alpha said to just leave them and go." "The Alpha isn't here," James snapped. "I want to see the state of her. I want to report back that the problem is resolving itself." Rage, clean and cold, flooded my veins. I didn't move. I focused, not on hearing them, but on feeling. I pushed my new empathy toward James, past his surface irritation. I sank into the murky pool of his emotion. I felt his ambition, a hard, greedy knot. Beneath that, a simmering resentment toward Peter he kept carefully hidden. And there, a slick, satisfied gloating. It was focused on a woman, not me. The impression was of calculated charm, of strategy. Maria. The alliance was progressing. He was engineering it, and it pleased him immensely. He saw I must have made a sound, a low growl that carried on the wind because both their heads snapped up. James's eyes scanned the trees. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "There you are, hiding like the vermin you are. You know, Peter tried to argue for a mercy visit, to check on his bastard. I convinced the elders it was a risk, that your condition might be contagious." His words were meant to wound. Instead, they crystallized my resolve. I stepped out from the shadows, not skulking, but walking deliberately into the edge of the clearing. I saw the shock register on both their faces. I was no longer the gaunt, broken thing they'd left. I was visibly pregnant, yes, but I was also robust, my eyes fierce, my strange hair gleaming in the dappled light. Joseph took an involuntary step back. James's smile faltered, then returned tighter. "You look different," James said, his voice losing some of its bravado. I said nothing. I just looked at him, pouring all my cold hatred, all the newfound power into my gaze. I pushed a wave of pure, empathic pressure toward him, not an emotion, but the crushing weight of the ridge of my solitude, of the James's face paled. He actually swayed on his feet, his hand going to his temple. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Leave the supplies," I said, my voice steady and deeper than he remembered. "And then get off my land." "Your land?" James barked a laugh, but it was strained. "This is cursed ground, no one's land." "It is mine now," I said. "Tell Peter his gifts are unwanted. Tell your elders their fear is justified. And tell Maria," I continued, watching his eyes widen in shock that I knew the name, "that the past is not so easily buried." I turned my back on them, a deliberate, lethal insult to a beta, and walked slowly back into the trees. I felt James's rage spike, hot and violent. I felt his impulse to shift, to chase me down and finish what he started. But stronger than that was his sudden, chilling spike of fear. Fear of what I had become. He didn't move. I didn't look back. I returned to my cave, my heart pounding not with fear, but with triumph. The confrontation was a test, and I had won. But the victory was short-lived. That night, the empathic pull returned, stronger than before. It was the ancient presence, Seleni's memory. But it wasn't just showing me the past. It was pulling me toward a specific location, a fissure in the northern rocks I had avoided. The pull was urgent, insistent. My child kicked hard, as if I had to go. As I navigated the treacherous rocks by moonlight, the pull became a guiding thread. It led me to the fissure, a dark slash in the cliff face. The scent of old magic and damp stone wafted out. I hesitated for only a second before slipping inside. It opened into a small, hidden cavern. In the center, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight from a crack above, was a stone altar. And on that altar lay a single, enormous wolf's fang, hung on a leather cord. It pulsed with a soft, silver light in time with the pull in my mind. This was no accident. This was left for me, a legacy. I reached out, my fingers inches from it, when a new emotion screamed across my empathy, so violent it made me cry out. It was Peter. Not sorrow this time. It was agony, betrayal, and a wave of crippling, debilitating weakness. It was followed instantly by a surge of triumphant, vicious joy from a signature I knew too well. The visions crashed into me, uncontrolled, fueled by the strength of the emotions and the shattered remnants of my mate bond. Peter, in the clearing under the pack's meeting oak, clutching his chest, collapsing to his knees. James standing over him, a silver dagger in his hand, its blade stained dark. Elders watching from the shadows, their faces impassive. A strange, auburn-haired woman, Maria, standing, the connection shattered, leaving me gasping on the cave floor, the visions seared behind my eyes. James hadn't just been scheming for an alliance. He had just staged a coup. And Peter, the alpha who cast me out, was dying. The vision of Peter's blood on the stone floor faded, but the echo of James's triumphant snarl did not. My hand, which had been reaching for the fang pendant on the altar, closed into a fist in the empty air. The cold of the hidden cavern rushed back in, but it was nothing compared to the ice now solidifying in my chest. He was dying. The man who had cast me out to die was being murdered by the very snake he'd chosen over me. A bitter, silent laugh choked me. There was no grief, only a savage, ironic justice that tasted like ash. Then my child turned within me, a sharp, insistent roll. Not a protest, a demand. He is not the priority, the new, clear voice within me stated. It was my own, yet forged in the solitude of the ridge. The pack is your pack. The thought was so foreign it staggered me, I had no pack. I was an exile. But the vision had shown me more than Peter's fall. It had shown me the faces of the others in the clearing. The elders, their eyes averted. The warriors standing idle. The betas shifting to flank James. They had allowed it. They had chosen a traitorous, ambitious beta over an alpha who had, however foolishly, tried to follow their own rotten laws. They were sheep led by a jackal now, and sheep were devoured. My gaze fell back to the pendant. It was a wolf's fang, longer than my finger, bound in silver wire to a leather cord. It hummed with a silent frequency I felt in my teeth. Selene's memory, her pride, her loneliness, her fierce protection was woven into it. This was no mere trinket. It was an anchor. For her, and now, perhaps, for me. I did not reach for it with hesitation this time. My fingers closed around the fang. A jolt, clean and sharp, raced up my arm. Not a vision, but a transfer. The lingering imprint of Selene's presence in the cavern dissolved, absorbed into the artifact, and a new certainty settled into my bones. The ridge was not just a place of exile. It was a seat, and it was mine. I slipped the cord over my head. The fang rested cold against my sternum, a weight that felt less like an addition and more like a part of me that had been missing. When I stepped out of the fissure and back into the moonlight, the moon-cursed ridge did not feel desolate. It felt like a kingdom, my kingdom. The following days were a frenzy of purpose. The empathy, now a constant, low-grade sense I could focus like a lens, told me the forest was empty of intruders. The coup had drawn all of Peter's pack inward. Good. It gave me time. I hunted with a ruthless efficiency that would have terrified my old self, taking a young deer and smoking the meat in my deeper cave. I fortified the entrance with a lattice of fallen branches, not to hide, but to mark a boundary. This was the heart of my territory. All the while, I planned. The empathetic link I'd forged with James during our border confrontation was a frayed, hateful thread, but it was still there. I could not read his thoughts, but I could sense the general direction of his presence, south, at the pack's core, and the roiling, oily triumph that now emanated from him. He was consolidating power. Maria's smug satisfaction was a lighter, sharper note alongside his. I had to move faster. The full moon was in 3 nights, a traditional time for pack gatherings, for pronouncements. James would use it to legitimize his rule, to present Maria as his new Luna, to bind the Riverstone alliance with his own bloodline. He would try to make it a celebration. I would make it a reckoning. The night before the full moon, I stood at the highest point of the northern rocks, the stone teeth biting at the starry sky. The fang pendant was warm against my skin. I closed my eyes and pushed my empathy out, not towards the packlands, but downwards into the ridge itself. I sought not people, but patterns. The memory of paths, the ghost impressions of the outcasts who had walked here with Selene. The land responded, not with visions, but with a subtle knowing. A route revealed itself to my mind's eye, not the main border trails, but a series of game paths, eroded gullies, and silent stretches of pine that formed a covert highway to the very edge of the clearing where they would gather. A path for an outsider, for a ghost. On the day of the full moon, I made my preparations. I washed in the icy stream, scrubbing the last traces of smoke and soil from my skin. My hair, once kept neat, now fell in a wild, dark cascade past my shoulders. The simple, torn dress I'd been exiled in was gone, replaced with leggings, and a tunic I'd fashioned from deer hide, practical and stark. The fang pendant hung open. I carried no weapon. My body, honed by the ridge and the power thrumming in my veins, were weapons enough. As dusk bled into twilight, I began my journey. The path was just as the ridge had suggested, challenging, hidden, but passable. My empathy acted as a radar, sensing the flutter of sleeping birds, the drowsy mind of a fox, the empty silence of the spaces between. I moved like one of the shadows, lengthening across the forest. The border scent markers of Peter's pack, now James's pack, stung my nose, a cloying, aggressive smell that had changed, becoming sharper, more anxious. The murmur of voices reached me first, a low, uneasy hum. Then, the smell of wood smoke and roasted meat. I crept to the very edge of the tree line, cloaked in darkness. The clearing was as I remembered from a lifetime ago, and from my vision. A large fire pit blazed in the center. The pack was assembled, but the atmosphere was nothing like the gatherings of old. There was no loose laughter, no ease. People stood in stiff clusters. Warriors were positioned at intervals, their eyes scanning not the woods for threats, but the crowd for dissent. And there, on the raised stone dais where Peter had once stood to exile me, stood James. He wore Peter's ceremonial cloak. The sight of it should have sent a bolt of agony through me. It only stoked the cold fire in my gut. Beside him, dressed in riverstone blue, was Maria. She was tall, elegant, her expression one of poised possession. Her hand rested on James's arm. The elders sat to the side, their faces unreal. And so, under the full moon's blessing, James's voice carried, slick and confident, we cement a new era of strength. The alliance with Riverstone is not just a promise, but a fact. My bond with Maria unites our packs as one. The weak leadership of the past is over. The time for survival is over. Now we thrive. A few cheers rose, forced and scattered. Most of the pack offered only a tense, rhythmic clapping. I could feel their collective emotion from my hiding place. A thick soup of fear, confusion, and a desperate, clawing hope that this new, harsh strength would protect them. James raised his hands for silence, a glint in his eye. There is one final piece of old business to discard, a symbol of that past weakness. The traitor, Peter, clings to a dishonorable life in the healer's den. His betrayal of this pack's future, his refusal to do his duty, led us to the brink. His sentence, ratified by the elders, is to be carried out at Moon High. Justice will be. He didn't get to finish. I didn't roar. I didn't burst from the trees. I simply stepped out of the shadows and into the ring of firelight at the clearing's edge. The conversation didn't die. It was severed. One moment James was speaking, the next, 100 pairs of eyes were locked on me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I saw recognition, then utter disbelief, dawn on dozens of faces. I saw Joseph, near the front, go pale as milk. James's jaw went slack. Maria's hand tightened on his arm, her poise. I walked forward. My steps were slow, deliberate, the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt the only sound. The crowd parted before me like water before a stone, creating a direct path to the dais. I let my empathy unfurl, not to probe, but to project. I let them feel the cold granite of the ridge, the fierce pulse of my own vitality, the unwavering, protective fury that swirled around the life in my womb. I let them feel my utter lack of fear. I stopped 20 feet from the dais. You were saying about justice, James. My voice, clear and carrying, was not the soft Omega's whisper they remembered. It was the voice of the ridge, edged with stone. He recovered, his surprise twisting into rage. Emily! He spat my name like a curse. The exiled Omega has returned to her grave. Warriors seize her. 4 warriors broke from their posts, moving towards me. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on James. I focused my will, my newfound power, and a wave of pure, primal dominance erupted from me. It was not the dominance of a pack hierarchy, but the dominance of a wild place, of a mother defending her den, of a sovereign in her own right. It was laced with the eerie, amplifying energy of the fang at my throat. The advancing warriors stumbled as if they'd hit a wall. One fell to his knees, a whimper escaping his throat. The others backed away, their eyes wide with instinctual terror. The entire pack seemed to sway under the pressure. James flinched, his own alpha aura, newly acquired and poorly fitted, recoiling. "What is that?" "No trick," I said, taking another step forward. The circle around me widened further. "You speak of discarding the past, James, but you are the past. A scheming beta who murders his alpha in the dark." I turned my gaze to Maria. "And you. You trade yourself for power to a male who stabs his own brother in the back." Maria's lips peeled back in a silent snarl, but she said nothing. The elders were staring, their masks finally shattered into expressions. "I am not here for him," I said, my voice dropping, yet somehow carrying further. "I am here for them." I swept a hand out, indicating the frozen, watching pack. "You lead them to slaughter. Your strength is a blade you will turn on them the moment they question you. You have made this pack a den of treachery. I have come to offer a choice." James laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "A choice? From an exiled Omega? You offer nothing, you are nothing." I smiled then, a small, cold thing. I reached up and closed my hand around the fang pendant. I poured my conviction into it, my claim, my strength, my promise of sanctuary not just for myself, but for any who wanted it. Then I let my empathy hook into that frayed thread connecting me to James, and I showed him. Not a vision, but a raw, emotional truth. I showed him the depth of my power, the solidity of my claim on the ridge, the absolute certainty of his downfall. I let him feel the terror he had inflicted on others reflected back at him, magnified. His bravado shattered. He took a physical step back, his face draining of color. He didn't see monsters or illusions. He saw me, as I truly was, his equal. No, his superior. "The moon-cursed ridge is no longer a graveyard," I announced, releasing the pendant and addressing the pack. "It is a territory. Mine. Any wolf who wishes for a different law, one not written by cowards and murderers, has a place there." My eyes found Joseph, then others I remembered as decent if silent. "You have until dawn to choose." I turned my back on James, on the dais, on the gaping pack. It was the ultimate dismissal. Walking away was a greater show of power than any attack. "Kill her!" James screamed, his voice cracking with panic and fury. "Now, all of you, kill her." A growl rippled through the warriors. Orders from their alpha, however shaken, were still orders. I heard the rush of bodies shifting, the snick of claws extending. I kept walking slowly towards the trees. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with anticipation. The cliff's edge was here. Just as I reached the tree line, a single, authoritative voice cut through the chaos, weak, strained, but ringing. Every wolf froze. I stopped and looked back. Supported by a healer, one arm in a sling, his face pale and gaunt but his eyes burning with a furious, dying light, Peter stood at the mouth of the path leading from the healer's den. He was covered in bandages, drenched in the scent of blood and poultices, but he was upright. He was alive. And his alpha command, though frayed, held just enough of its old power to lock the warriors in place. His gaze found me across the clearing. In his eyes, I saw the shock, the dawning, incomprehensible realization of what I had become. I saw the ruin of his choices. I saw no apology, only a stark, final assessment. James looked from Peter to me, his triumph curdling into nightmare. His coup was unraveling before the two people he had tried to destroy. Peter's voice was a ragged whisper, but it carried in the dead silence. "The first one who moves against her," he said, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, "answers to me." The clearing held its breath. The standoff was perfect, fragile, and lethal. And in that moment, from the back of the crowd, a young female Omega I barely remembered, her eyes wide with a desperate hope, took a single, shaking step forward towards me. The choice had begun. The first step was a crack in the dam. A young Omega, his face pale but his eyes fixed on mine, took one shuffling step away from the huddled pack and toward the tree line where I stood. The sound of his foot on the dry earth was louder than any howl. James's snarl cut through the frozen silence. "Take another step, and you die with her." But the command lacked its former power. The pack's fear, a thick, sour scent in the air, was no longer directed solely at me. It swirled between them, a toxic mist of confusion. They looked from James, rigid with fury on the dais, to Peter, bleeding and leaning heavily against a post at the clearing's edge, to me, standing apart with the moon at my back. Peter's voice was a ragged scrape of sound, but it carried. "The order is countermanded." He lifted his head, his alpha aura a guttering, dying flame, but a flame nonetheless. "No one touches her." James's eyes blazed with pure, undiluted hatred, for Peter, for me, for the unraveling of his moment. Maria stood beside him, her hand on his arm, not in comfort but in restraint. Her calculating gaze swept over the pack, the young Omega, emboldened by Peter's words or broken by his own fear, took another step. Then he broke into a run, darting past the stunned warriors and skidding to a halt several yards from me. He didn't come closer, just stood there, trembling, his head bowed in a mix of old habit and new terror. "Traitor!" James roared, and a ripple went through the warriors. One, a broad-shouldered male loyal to James, took an aggressive... I didn't move. I simply let my power, the deep, resonant strength of the ridge that lived in my bones and hummed in Seleni's fang against my chest, roll outward. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement, a wall. The warrior hit the edge of that invisible force and stumbled back as if shoved, confusion wiping the aggression from his face. "The only traitor here," I said, my voice calm and clear, "is the one who murders his alpha in the dark. Your choice is simple. Stay with a coward who rules by betrayal, or leave. The ridge offers sanctuary, not an order, a choice." Another figure moved from the back of the crowd, an older female, a caretaker who had never met my eyes in the old days. She walked slowly, deliberately, past James's glaring enforcers and toward me. Then a third, a young hunter who kept glancing back at Peter with a pained expression. James was apoplectic. "You think this ragged bunch of weaklings will help you? You are one female, with a pup on the way." "I am the legacy of the ridge," I corrected him, my hand resting on the swell of my child. "And I am not alone." A low, pained chuckle came from Peter's direction. He was sliding down the post, his strength failing. The healer, a timid man I remembered, darted from the shadows of the healer's den to catch him. The sight of their fallen alpha, truly fallen now, broke something in the pack's paralysis. It wasn't a stampede. It was a trickle, a slow, fearful exodus. 5 more broke away, heads down, moving quickly to join the small, growing cluster near me. They didn't look like rebels. They looked like survivors fleeing a sinking ship. James watched them go, his chest heaving. Then his gaze snapped to Maria. A silent communication passed between them. Her lips thinned, and she gave a sharp, "Enough," James declared, his voice suddenly cold and controlled. He was letting the chaff blow away. "Go, all of you who cling to the past. Follow the Omega to your grave on the ridge. The rest of you..." He swept his gaze over the remaining pack members, the warriors, the elders who had supported his coup. "We are the future. At first light, the Riverstone emissaries arrive to finalize our alliance. We will be strong. We will be feared." His threat was clear. He was letting us leave tonight because the spectacle was undermining him. But come morning, we would be enemies. Officially, I had what I came for. More, in fact. I looked at my ragged band of exiles, 8 in total, including the first brave Omega. Their fear was a palpable cloud, but beneath it, I sensed a desperate spark of hope. It was enough. "We leave now," I said to them, not taking my eyes off James. Stay close. I turned my back on the clearing, on Peter slumped in the healer's arms, on James and his poisonous triumph. It was the ultimate dismissal. My new followers fell in behind me, a silent, shuffling line. As we melted into the trees, I felt James's gaze burning into my back, a promise of future violence. The journey back to the ridge was made in tense silence. My senses were stretched to their limits, listening for pursuit, but none came. James was consolidating his power. The ridge, for now, was still a place of superstition and fear. When the jagged outline of the moon-cursed ridge appeared against the night sky, a collective sigh of relief went through the group. The first Omega, whose name I learned was Leo, whispered, "It's so barren." "It is alive," I said, not unkindly. "You just have to learn its language. Follow me." I led them not to my deeper cave, but to a sheltered gully with a clean stream. "Rest here. Drink. No fire. I will return." I needed to see Peter. The thought was clinical, detached. I felt no pull of the broken mate bond, only a cold thread of unfinished business. He had, in his final act of failing authority, shielded me. He had also started this. I left my new followers under the watchful moon and circled back through the territory, a ghost in my own land. Approaching the pack's clearing from the downwind side, I hid in the thick brush at the tree line. The clearing was changed. The dais where James had stood was empty. Most of the pack had dispersed. Torches burned near the healer's den. 2 figures stood guard outside the small, woven wood structure. James's men, not to protect Peter. I watched, patient as the stone around me. After an hour, the healer emerged, his shoulders slumped. He spoke quietly to the guards, then hurried away. One guard leaned in to peer through the door flap, grunted, and resumed his post. They were bored, confident. Peter was inside. I waited until the moon dipped behind a cloud, plunging the edge of the clearing into deeper shadow. Then I moved. Not as a wolf, but as a shadow myself, using the empathy that was my new gift to project a sense of nothing here, just the wind ahead of me. I slipped around the back of the healer's den, where the wall was just loosely woven branches. I could hear his ragged breathing from outside. Peering through a gap, I saw him. He lay on a low pallet, bare-chested, his torso wrapped in thick, stained bandages. His face was ashen, his eyes closed. The scent of blood and bitter herbs was strong. The guards were 10 feet away around the corner. I had minutes, if that. My fingers found a loose section of weaving. I pulled it aside, just enough to slide through, and let it fall silently back into place inside the den. His eyes opened instantly. Alpha instincts, even on the brink of death. They found me in the dark, widening in disbelief, then in a pain that had nothing to do with his wounds. Wiley. It was a breath, a ghost of my name. "Be silent," I whispered, kneeling beside the pallet. My presence was a void in the room, absorbing sound, dampening scent. The guards outside wouldn't hear. He stared up at me, his gaze tracing the lines of my face, the defiant set of my jaw, the pendant that rested against my sternum. "You came back. I came to see the consequences of a weak alpha," I said, my voice low and even. "Your pack is broken. Your beta is a murderer. Your alliance is a transaction with your killer's accomplice." A spasm of agony twisted his features. "I know." "Why?" The question left my lips before I could stop it. Not a plea, but a demand for the final accounting. "You chose them. The pack, the alliance. Was it worth this?" He struggled to draw breath. "I thought it was my duty to make us strong. An Omega mate, the elders, James said." "James said," I repeated, the words flat. "And you listened. You cast out your mate, your child." I placed a hand on my stomach, and his eyes followed the movement, filling with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the remaining light from the room. "I am sorry." The words were ash. Your sorrow is worthless to me. I meant it. But your death here at James's feet serves no purpose but to make him stronger. His brow furrowed in confusion, in fading focus. What? The pack that left with me is small, fearful. James will come for us with Riverstone warriors at his back. I leaned closer, letting him see the absolute certainty in my eyes. I will defend what is mine, but a dying alpha in my territory could be a symbol, or a burden. Understanding, slow and painful, dawned on him. You want me to live. I don't care if you live or die, Peter, I said, and it was the truest thing I'd ever spoken to him. But if you die here, you are just a footnote in James's story. If you come to the ridge, you become a problem for him. A reminder of his crime, a challenge to his legitimacy. A bitter, bloody cough shook him. The ridge kills exiles. The ridge reveals exiles, I corrected. I stood up. The decision was his. I had offered a thread, not a lifeline. The guards are bored. In a few hours, they will be drowsy. The gap is behind you. If you can crawl through it, and if you can make it to the stream in the eastern gully before dawn, you will find my sentry. Tell him Emily sent you. I turned to go to slip back into the night. Emily! His voice stopped me, a final, fragile thread. The child! I looked back at him, this broken man who had once been my whole world. Is mine, I said, and the ridges. It will never be yours. Then I was gone, leaving him in the dark with his failure and a single, impossible choice. Leo was jumpy but alert when I returned to the gully. The others slept fitfully. Someone's coming, he hissed, pointing east. I nodded. I know, he may be injured. If he makes it here, bring him to the northern rocks. Do not be seen. Leo's eyes went wide, but he nodded. I retreated to my deeper cave, to the stone altar and the quiet presence of Selene. I needed to think, to plan. James would attack. He had to. My display had humiliated him, and my existence was a threat. He would not wait long. The sound of stumbling footsteps and labored breathing echoed in the cavern entrance just before dawn. Leo and another exile, the older female named Anya, half-carried, half-dragged, they laid him on the flat stone before the altar. He was unconscious again, his bandages freshly soaked with blood. He had made it. Through sheer, stubborn alpha will, he had chosen to become a problem. What do we do with him? Anya asked, her voice wary. We let the ridge decide, I said, looking down at him. I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a cold assessment. He was a tool, a weapon to be aimed at James, and perhaps a lesson. I placed Selene's fang on the altar and knelt, not in prayer but in focus. I reached for the deep, humming power of the place, letting it flow through me. The air in the cavern grew still and heavy. The exiles backed away, eyes wide. A faint, silvery light, moonlight from no visible source, began to coalesce around Peter's wounded body. It didn't heal him. I didn't have that power. But it seeped into his wounds, stemming the fresh flow of blood, lending a faint, strengthening warmth to his icy skin. The ridge was accepting him. For now, his eyelids fluttered open. He saw the cavern ceiling, then my face looking down at him, illuminated by the strange, "Welcome to the moon-cursed ridge, Peter," I said, my voice echoing in the sacred space. You are an exile here, the same as the rest of us. Your authority is gone. Your title is dust. You live because I allow it, and because your death is more useful to me later. He had no words. He just stared, lost in a reality he could no longer command. Leo rushed into the cavern then, his face pale with panic. Emily, scouts, at the base of the southern slope. I stood, the soft light snuffing out. The time for recovery was over. James wasn't waiting for dawn. He was already here. James's scouts were at the base of the ridge. The waiting was over. I stood at the mouth of my cavern, the fang pendant cold against my sternum. Below, in the sheltered hollow where the stream cut through, My little band of exiles huddled. I could smell their fear, a sharp, sour tang on the wind. Leo was a tense shadow by the water, Anya organizing the others to gather stones. They were preparing for a siege. They were preparing to die. They looked to me, not as an omega, but as the woman who had walked out of this stone and offered them a choice. I had brought them here. Their survival was now a weight in my hands, heavy and undeniable. Peter lay on a pallet of furs deeper in the cavern, his breathing a ragged, wet sound. The ridge's energy had sealed the worst of his wounds, knitting flesh over the mortal tear James's claws had left. But it couldn't fill the blood he'd lost or mend the shock to his spirit. He was awake, his amber eyes tracking me as I turned from the view. "They'll come at dusk," he rasped. "James won't risk the full dark on unfamiliar ground. He'll want it done before moonrise." I walked over to him, looking down. The mighty Alpha, reduced to a prophecy of his own pack's tactics. "You know his mind." I thought I did. Bitterness etched his face. I didn't know the depth of it. His regret was a useless thing. I felt nothing for it. "Then tell me what I don't know. Where will he strike?" "The southern slope is the easiest ascent." Peter pushed himself up on an elbow, wincing. "He'll use it, but he's cautious. He'll send a vanguard up the slope as a distraction. His main force, his best warriors, they'll find another way. He'll have spent the afternoon scouting. There's a goat path, treacherous, on the western face. It leads to a ledge that overlooks this hollow." A cold clarity settled over me. He was right. A direct assault was too simple for James's newfound ambition. He would want a tactical victory, a demonstration of his superior cunning. "Can you stand?" "If I have to." "You have to." I helped him up, his weight leaning heavily on my shoulder. The exiles watched in silent confusion as I half-guided, half-dragged Peter out of the cavern and along a narrow, crumbling ledge that skirted the northern rock face. He was slow, his movements stiff with pain, but he didn't complain. The old Peter would have commanded. This broken one We reached a vantage point, a jutting tooth of rock shrouded by thorny brush. From here, we could see the southern slope clearly and a sliver of the western cliffs. I settled Peter against the stone. "Watch the west. Tell me when you see movement. What are you going to do?" "What the ridge demands," I said, and left him there. Back in the hollow, I gathered the exiles, 8 faces, pale and determined. "They're coming, but not just from the front. James will try to flank us to come from above." I pointed to the western cliff top. "I will meet them there. You will hold the slope. You will not let them breach this hollow. This is your ground now. Defend it." Leo swallowed hard. "How? We're not warriors." "You are now." I met each of their eyes, letting the certainty I felt, the ridge's ancient, defiant hum, flow into my gaze. "Use the terrain, the stream, the loose rocks, the narrow paths. Fight as a group. Protect each other. You chose freedom over submission. Now fight for it." Anya nodded, her gnarled hands tightening around a heavy walking stick she'd fashioned. I didn't offer them false hope. I offered them a purpose. It was enough. As they moved to their positions, I turned and began to climb. The western face was sheer, but the stone was old and fractured. I found handholds and fissures, the pendant against my chest seeming to pulse with a guiding rhythm. My body, strengthened by solitude and fury, moved with a surety that felt less like my own and more like the mountain's will. I climbed not as a woman, but as an extension of the ridge itself. I reached the ledge just as the first of James's warriors pulled himself over the edge. He was a broad-shouldered enforcer I recognized from the pack, a man who had always sneered at omegas. His surprise at seeing me waiting was comical. He had expected to find panicking exiles below, not a solitary figure silhouetted against the dying sun. "The Alpha's whore," he grunted, shifting to let a second warrior climb up behind him. "Come to beg." I didn't answer. I let the change take me. It was not the painful, submissive shift of an omega. It was an eruption. Bones realigned with a series of sharp, clean cracks, fur the color of weathered stone and twilight shadow bursting from my skin. I stood on 4 paws, larger than I had ever been, my senses exploding outward. I could taste the fear sweat on the enforcer, hear the frantic heartbeat of the man behind him, feel the vibrations of the main force beginning their ascent far below on the southern slope. The enforcer shifted in response, his wolf form brutish and familiar. He lunged. I didn't meet the charge. I sidestepped, a fluid movement, and my jaws closed on the back of his leg as he passed. Bones snapped. His howl of pain was cut short as I used his own momentum to shove him toward the cliff edge. He scrabbled, claws shrieking on stone, and then he was gone, his fading cry ending in a distant, final thud. The second warrior froze, his shift half complete, trapped between forms. The scent of his terror was overwhelming. I took a step forward, a low growl rumbling in my chest that seemed to vibrate through the very ledge. He stumbled back, too close to the edge, and with a desperate, wordless cry, he simply turned and leaped for the safety of a lower outcrop. I heard the sickening slip of gravel, a scramble, and then a falling silence. 2 gone, but more were coming. I could hear their claws on the rock below, their determined grunts. I couldn't hold this ledge against a dozen. I threw my head back and howled. It was not a sound of challenge, nor of warning. It was a call. It was the cry of the exiled, the lonely, the wronged. It poured out of me, amplified by the pendant, shaped by the memory of Selene and the centuries of silence in these stones. It was the voice of the moon-cursed ridge itself, and the ridge answered. The mountain trembled, not a quake, but a deep, groaning shift. From the fissures around me, a thick, gray mist began to pour, not rising from the ground but weeping from the stone. It was the same mist that had swirled the night of my exile, the boundary of this forsaken place. It rolled down the western face, swallowing the climbing warriors. I heard shouts of confusion, snarls turning to yelps of alarm as handholds vanished, as paths disappeared into formless, chilling gray. The mist flowed past me, an obedient tide, and spilled over the ledge, pouring down toward the southern slope. I stood above it, a sentinel in the clear, cold air, and watched as James's neatly planned. Below in the hollow, my exiles saw the mist come. They held their line, and as James's distracted vanguard stumbled out of the roiling gray, disoriented and blind, my people fought. They used their rocks and sticks, their desperation honed into a sharp, collective will. They fought for the home I had promised. I turned from the western cliff. My work there was done. I picked my way down a different path, a hidden seam in the rock, and emerged near the base of the southern slope, behind the lines of the main force. The mist was thinner here, clinging to the ground in patches. I saw James. He was in his wolf form, a massive, sleek-furred beast, trying to rally his warriors, his barks sharp with fury. Maria was beside him in human form, her face a mask of cold frustration, shouting orders that were lost in the din. I shifted back, standing there clad only in the mist and twilight, the fang pendant gleaming. I called his name. "James!" His head snapped around. His wolf eyes, full of rage and ambition, found me. He shifted back, naked and furious. This is your witchery. "This is my home," I said, my voice carrying with an unnatural calm. He let out a roar of pure hatred and charged, shifting mid-stride. I didn't move. I let him come. As he leaped, a final, focused pulse of energy left me, a command to the very earth. The ground before me, already loosened by the mist and the ancient magic of the place, gave way. A section of the slope collapsed in a rush of dirt and stone. James's leap became a fall. He landed hard, half buried in the slide, his leg twisted at a wrong angle. He struggled, trying to rise. The fight around us was stuttering to a halt. His warriors stared, their confidence shattered. My exiles, bloodied but standing, watched from their defensive line above. I walked toward him, each step deliberate. I knelt beside him in the rubble. His breath came in pained gasps. His eyes, "You wanted an alliance with strength," I whispered, so only he could hear. "You built it on betrayal, look at it now." I looked past him to Maria. She was already backing away, her river stone guards closing around her. Her expression was no longer one of alliance, but of cold calculation. She saw a lost cause. With a last, dismissive glance at the broken alpha in the dirt, she turned and melted into the trees with her entourage. The proposed alliance died not with a roar, but with a retreating footstep. I stood. I addressed the remnants of James's force, the warriors who had followed him here. "The ridge has taken your alpha's ambition. You can die here on this stone for a man who sold his own pack for power, or you can leave. Go back to whatever is left. But know this territory is mine. Any who cross its border with ill intent will share his fate." I didn't need to gesture to James, writhing in the dirt. The message was clear. One by one, the warriors dropped their eyes. They shifted, not to attack, but to flee. They turned and ran, disappearing into the forest, leaving their weapons, their pride, and their broken leader behind. Silence fell, broken only by the moan of the wind and James's pained breathing. My exiles began to descend the slope, their faces etched with awe and exhaustion. Lee helped Anya. I looked up to the vantage point where I'd left Peter. He was gone from the ledge. I found him moments later, limping down the main path. He had witnessed it all. His face was ashen, not from pain, but from the profound, dismantling understanding of what had just happened. The pack he had led, the future he had envisioned, all of it had crumbled. And I, the omega he had cast out, had been the instrument of its end. He stopped before me, his gaze going from my face to the pendant, to the defeated James. "It's over," he said, his voice hollow. "For him," I said. "For you." "Not for me." I turned to my people. "Gather what you can from their supplies, tend to your wounds, the ridge is ours. Tonight we rest, tomorrow we build." They set to work with a weary but vibrant energy. They were survivors. I looked at James. "Can you walk?" He glared, hatred his only remaining strength. "Does it matter?" "To me, no, but the ridge doesn't take life without purpose. It exiles." I nodded to two of the exiles. "Take him to the border, leave him there. Where he goes after is his own journey." As they dragged him away, I finally turned to Peter. He stood alone, a ghost between two worlds. "And me?" he asked. The bond between us was a dead thing, a scar. I felt no pull toward him, no lingering affection, only the cold fact of history. "You are an exile, like me, like them. The ridge spared you. You can stay and work and contribute. You will have no rank, no authority. You will live by my law, the law of this place, or you can walk away and find your own path." He searched my face, looking for some hint of the woman he had known, the woman who had loved him. He found only the alpha of the ridge. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in acceptance. The final, bitter truth. "I'll stay," he murmured. "I have nowhere else to go." I nodded. It was a practical decision. I felt nothing. I led the way back up to the cavern. The exiles followed, carrying their spoils and their hope. Peter limped at the rear. Behind us, the mist began to slowly recede, seeping back into the stone from whence it came. In the clearing under the rising moon, I stood before my people. We were few. We were wounded. We were free. I placed my hand on the cold stone of the ridge. In the stillness, I could almost hear an echo, a woman's laugh, the whisper of a forgotten pack, the enduring silence of stone that had witnessed countless endings and beginnings. This was not an ending. It was a foundation. I am Emily. I am the alpha of the moon-cursed ridge, and this is where our story begins.